This is Stories from the Hackery, podcast about the students, alumni, and community members that continue to shape Nashville Software School. Nashville Software School is the nation's first nonprofit coding bootcamp where a person with aptitude and motivation can gain the skills needed for a career in tech. For more information, visit us at NashvilleSoftwareSchool.com. So welcome to another episode of Stories from the Hackery, podcast from Nashville Software School. I'm John Wark. I'm the founder and CEO of the software school. And we're gonna talk, among other things, we're gonna talk about data engineering some today, which is a topic we've hit a couple of times in the last few months. And to do that, we've got two NSS grads who've been working in data engineering and other aspects of the data world since they graduated from Nashville Software School. So I've got Teresa Whitesell with us, and I've got Joshua Rio-Ross with us. So as we usually do, I'll start by asking them to introduce themselves. So Teresa, maybe let's start with you. So give us your personal elevator pitch. Who is Teresa?
First of all, thank you for having me today. It's a real pleasure. So my name is Teresa Whitesell, and I work in public cloud at HCA, which I've done for a little over 3 years. I am a Nashville native, so I was born and bred here in Nashville, one of the rare unicorns. And I've always been a very analytical person, very scientifically minded, ever since I can remember. So moving into a data career was a really natural progression for me. It just really fit with the way that I think, the way that I function naturally. So in 2019, I knew that I wanted to go into data analytics, but I didn't quite know how to break in, whether you could just get a job or if you needed to go to school or whatever. And so I found the only person that I knew at the time who worked in data, sat down next to her during choir practice and just said, "Joy, tell me how I could do this. Like, what do I do?" And she said, "Go to Nashville Software School. It's the best. And that will help you." She was an early graduate, like cohort 13 or something. And so that kind of led me to Nashville Software School, and the rest of the story. I went to an info session, met Mary. I was in the first full-time data analytics cohort in 2020, right at the beginning of COVID, which was a very interesting time for all of us. But it was really nice to have something that wasn't pandemic related to focus on and to really be able to learn and skill up. So it ended up being a really good time for me to be able to concentrate. After I graduated, I was able to help teach some of the cohorts for a little while. And then I moved on to start at HCA through the technical residency program, which I chose the technical residency because it felt like a really good learning opportunity that I would be able to continue learning and skilling up, which is really important to me. And so I've been on the same team ever since I finished the technical residency and have gotten promoted through the ranks since then. My primary responsibility at HCA is for reporting related to public cloud consumption and really all things related to our cloud environments. So as you may or may not know, cloud is a highly variable environment with related to cost. You can spend a lot, you can spend a little, but you need to be aware of what's going on. And so it was really important when I started to have reporting that was available to people anytime that they needed it to be able to see what their costs were. It's not quite real time, but we're within 24 hours, and which is much better than waiting for the invoice at the end of the month and getting a nasty surprise. And so I started with those reports and was able to make an impact really quickly and build from there. I came back to NSS in 2023 for the data science program. And of course, Michael Holloway, amazing teacher. I knew that was going to give me the skills that I was looking for in order to advance further and go to the next stage. And it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. So at this point, I am a staff engineer and I lead the analytics team for cloud. So we've got 2 more data analysts who work with me, and I dip my toes into other teams as well to help them out. And we just try to do whatever is needed. So I've started data engineering because we needed data engineering, and I do a lot of analytics, talk reporting, and just basically whatever anybody says, we need this, and I can help with data.
All right. Well, thanks, Teresa. Yeah, you have had kind of the full NSS experience, right? I mean, including, what was it, 1 day in person or a day and a half in person for your
Day and a half. Yeah.
analytics cohort?
I think we were the last ones in the building.
You were.
at the start,
Yes.
so-
Everybody else had gone remote, I think, by the Friday before, but you guys didn't start till Monday. So it was like,
Right.
well, all right. Well,
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, you've had the whole data side experience, analytics, data science,
Yeah.
good dose of Michael Holloway, good dose of Mary Van Valkenburg. I mean, it's all good stuff. All right. Well, thank you. So Joshua, what's your elevator pitch?
Yeah. So I first of all, again, happy to be here, and also happy to be on here with Teresa, who has been part of this story for me in a couple places. So I'll highlight those. But my background is in a few different things. I did school for probably much too long. So I did a degree in English literature, a degree in mathematics, and a master's in math and a master's in philosophical theology. And so through all of that, the expectation was that the math was going to be used to make money. And that proved true. So I taught mathematics for about 10 years at the college level. And most recently, that was at Tribeca Nazarene University, but would fairly quickly found that was becoming sort of an unsustainable lifestyle. The amount of work I had to do to live in Nashville, I came out to Nashville because this is where my wife is from, her family is here, and so therefore it was where collectively we could have the most established roots. My family's kind of scattered all over the place. And so this was the place we knew we wanted to settle down, but it was not the place that was easy to live in, especially as Nashville has changed over the years. And so with that, I knew there were other opportunities to apply the mathematical skills I've been teaching, statistics, as well as college algebra and probability and a variety of other things. And it seemed like data analytics or data science or something with data was going to be the way to go, and already had taken on some odd jobs in that direction. And so I got acquainted with NSS through another faculty member at Tribeca. They were trying to build a relationship with NSS. And at the very least, I ended up building a relationship with NSS and started the data analytics cohort in the evenings while I was teaching at Tribeca for a semester. And Teresa was my junior instructor for that. And so a big part of how I am here today. And then I continued to teach data analytics and immediately went into taking the data science course here at NSS as well. And then very basically taught analytics for a year while learning data science. And my first opportunity outside of NSS was a data architecture role. So even though I learned analytics and then data science, the actual role I got was data architecture at HCA. And again, Teresa paved the way there. And so on a different team from Teresa, but also a part of all of that cloud work that they were doing there. And to skip forward a little bit, though, I learned a ton there, contributed a lot to the building out their cloud infrastructure, and was really tasked with a lot of kind of innovation and research efforts. And also wanted to continue that ML direction that I'd been able, upskilled in with Nashville Software School. And so I jumped over from, after a year and a half or 2 years, from a massive enterprise of HCA, innovating and building out their cloud, to an itty bitty healthcare startup. And that did not go as expected, but it was a team that I could learn a lot with. And so I was hired as a data scientist, very quickly got other responsibilities as a data architect, a data engineer, and as a software developer. The startup lifestyle where you do what's needed at the moment. There were a pretty significant amount of changes at the top of that company. And so I switched companies again and accepted a data engineering role at 40AU, which is a local consulting company, and am fully on board with a single FinTech client now. So it's been a whirlwind for these kind of first 2.5, 3 years. But I've loved it. I've learned a ton and kind of experienced what data engineering looks like in a variety of different phases.
Yeah, you've had sort of data engineering sort of from a very multidimensional kind of set of perspectives, right? The total total huge enterprise perspective, the startup perspectives, since no startup's a single perspective.
Yes.
Right. And then, I mean, we were talking at the time you made your transition to the consulting world, and I remember, I think, expressing to you at the time that I thought that was very interesting that one of the local consultancy was hiring somebody specifically for data engineering, because that's not really something that I think we've traditionally thought of as something that the consultancies did lots of, except for maybe some of the big consultancies that work at Fortune 100 type companies and stuff.
Right.
So I was really intrigued, given some knowledge of 40AU, who's been a great NSS partner since they started.
Yes.
I mean, since cohort 2, they hired their first NSS graduate. I think Christopher's still there, if I'm not mistaken.
Right. Yes.
So, it was really interesting to me that was happening. So, that's something maybe we'll come back to as we talk. So, well, thanks to both of you for joining us. The two of you, along with, I think, mainly some of your colleagues from NSS at HCA, both some web dev grads and some data program grads, were some of the first graduates that we saw that were moving into kind of full-time data engineering jobs, right? Which is, we didn't have a data engineering boot camp. We kind of nibbled around a lot of the edges, but it was not a focus area for us. It was really not a thing that people talked about a lot 10 years ago as a distinct sort of career path, right? But it's become one. And in Nashville, in fact, from the data we've seen, it's proportionately, we've got more data engineering going on in Nashville as a career path than most cities in the United States do, which is interesting. I think that's probably the healthcare industry mainly driving it, but I'm not 100% sure of that. Again, I want to kind of get your guys' view of that. So for those who are listening to us who maybe aren't sure what data engineering means, maybe could the two of you sort of describe, your view of what it is that a data engineer does, or maybe the scope of that, because I think there is variety depending upon the kind of place you go to, what data engineering means. So maybe give us, sort of the nickel overview of what data engineering roles look like, and how does it differ from data analytics and data science?
Yeah, so I have a certain perspective on it, and it might not be the typical perspective. I know Joshua has worked on much more traditional data engineering teams in data areas. I'm coming at it from a very different angle. I work on a team with all infrastructure engineers. So before cloud, they were on-prem infrastructure engineers. So they're amazing engineers. I've learned so much from them. But from that data engineering perspective, I've kind of made it up as I've gone along. So there might be some things I have in common with more traditional data engineering teams and other things I don't, just because we're very small. And it feels odd to say that we're very small considering I work at HCA, which is not small. But in our area, public cloud was so new when I joined that it felt a little bit more like a startup than a traditional company where it's been around for 60 years. We got the benefits of being that traditional company in that it's not going to run out of money. It's very stable. We work 40 hours a week. Work-life balance is very important. But we also got to innovate and just kind of make some things up. Whatever was going to work, whatever we thought was going to work for the next 6 months or a year. And so for me, because I the whole scope of the data lifecycle, from data integrations all the way through to the end analytics and stakeholder communications, I don't know exactly where to draw the line. I think data engineering is somewhere before it gets into the dashboard. But for me, data engineering really means getting the data from the source reliably. So, you need data validation. You need to have that automated in a reliable way, getting that into a SQL database for, the analysts or the analytic engineers, in some cases, to pick it up, transform it, and make it useful for the business. So I think data engineers have a really important role with creating the platform, making sure everything's solid. A lot of data engineering teams do those transformations as well. But I think at least what I'm seeing is that there's more segmentation. And so you might have a data engineer who builds the platform, is responsible for the reliability, but then you have analytics engineers who are in the middle and do a lot more of that transformation step, as well as the end BI developer who is responsible for communicating the data. So that's my perspective. I don't know how close that is to a traditional data engineer.
Well, I think you raise a good point, because I'm not 100% sure there is such a thing as traditional in data engineering at this point. And, from what we've seen, it feels like what you said there about the lines kind of get drawn in different places. So Joshua, I'm curious kind of your definition and how you feel about that.
Yeah, this has been helpful. And listening to Teresa's answer, I think it was very helpful, because I think she's absolutely right. For the most part, I think of data work and data engineering work specifically as this process of obtaining and delivering data for a particular use case, and whatever that kind of entails in the middle there, right? So this process of getting the data you need and delivering it to somebody else, and whatever you have to do in the middle of it for that to be able to be useful for them. But I think the one thing that comes to mind that might distinguish that is from maybe it's software engineering, which also works with data all the time. That's a core
Right.
part of the job. Is the type of product that you are delivering data for is usually data focused. So it's usually an analytics product or an ML product or another engineering opportunity, kind of an engineering handoff, as opposed to, for instance, thinking of when I was working directly with sort of a SaaS offering where our product was a web app essentially. Then the data that we were working with was usually sort of a snapshot, one line at a time, real time, being transformed, but transformed for the sake of going into a database that the app is actually using. And usually, somebody who works with that kind of data is called a software engineer. And
Right.
whereas a data engineer would more be considered somebody who takes that data. And I, for instance, helped with a job where we were preparing that data to also be delivered to the app, but it was performing analytics for our customers. And so that difference there was really the type of product we were delivering, and therefore the type of data transformations that we had to do in order to meet that need. In some cases, there was huge intersection with what the software engineers were doing, but it was largely characterized by the obtaining or what we were using that data for in the end.
Right. Okay. Well, go ahead, Teresa.
Sorry, Judd. I think that's a really good point, Joshua, and it reminds me of some things that I've been seeing and reading, and that software engineering and data engineering, there can be a lot of overlap there, and data engineers benefit from having a software engineering mindset. Because like in your example where you're doing real-time analytics on the fly for the customer, like there's not a lot of room for delay. And so the ability to write a very, very efficient code and use those software engineering techniques is really important, in addition to understanding the data and what the analysts are going to need to do with it.
Yeah. So lots of potential overlap with software. Certainly the nature of a lot of the tasks, right? You're writing server-side code. So a lot of overlap with at least server-side software engineering.
Yes.
I think it's probably rarer to have much overlap with front-end software development. But, Teresa, as you said, but also, it butts up against, or again, even overlaps with the data analytics and data science type work, right? And I think that's where we've landed on our data engineering program, is the end product is putting some data in place for business intelligence, data analytics, data science, that kind of thing, which I think also distinguishes a little bit from where the data side of software engineering often lands, which tends to be more around transactional databases and the business applications that use them, right? So again, but the lines get really blurry, is our sense, right? But again, I think really helpful. So given there is such an overlap with software engineering, though, both of you went through our, the NSS data analytics and data science programs, which certainly you do programming. I mean, you learn Python. In the case of data science, you also work in R. Probably not a language a lot of people use for data engineering, but that's okay. How did data analytics and data science give you a good foundation for tackling data engineering work once you got out on the job and it was like, hey, yeah, we need somebody to do this stuff too. And then maybe a little bit of what would have been helpful in addition to that, which maybe I'm leading towards some discussion of our new data engineering program. I don't know. So, but what do you guys think about that?
So a couple of things come to mind. So data analytics and data science helped immensely because underlying those, you're always going to have to do some level of data engineering if you're going to do some meaningful data work. If it's not just being handed to you prepped and already analyzed, then you're going to at least want to get your features or your metrics ready. And that process of getting your features or metrics ready might be called analytics engineering, but even analytics engineering might just be considered like a circle with complete, like within data engineering, right? And so that might just be a labeling of a subset of responsibilities there. And so I can give a very concrete example. In the data science bootcamp, we had a hot teaming project, which was where we worked with healthcare data. It's the largest publicly available healthcare data set, where the assignment was basically to try to identify where different patients were basically getting referrals and whether those referrals were within or without of a specific network. And so a very common problem within the healthcare space is you want you to keep your patients within your system. And so you want your referrals to stay within your system. And so this was to investigate, are these patients actually being referred within the system to be able to optimize the particular healthcare company's system of referrals, their network. And so this process required us to obtain this very large data set and work with it on our local machines. And that immediately meant that we had to seek out certain kinds of optimizations and transformations to be able to work with this data, both without destroying our machines, but also to be able to answer very specific questions. And so there was the analytics component, there was a data science component where we were trying to answer very concrete questions but in order to get there, we needed to format the data to be able to answer those questions. And so all that taken together, spoken more broadly, in data engineering, it's very valuable for you to know what the data is going to be used for that you're delivering. And in most cases, the kind of wisdom that you get is don't start doing your work until you know exactly what the people who are going to use this data are trying to accomplish, and make sure that you are aligned on what that data needs to look like in order for them to do that. And that goes two directions. One, the data needs to be right or formatted correctly for the downstream team. You also want to be able to draw a clear line on what is the other team's responsibility and what is yours. And this especially comes up in Teresa's context a lot, in these hyperscale enterprise contexts where delineation of team responsibilities is most of the work. And so that data engineering very quickly gets involved with also like organizational logic. But all of that taken together, to answer your question or maybe summarize, that data analytics and data science helped me know the downstream sorts of responsibilities and tasks that data engineer actually serves, and to have some sort of context for the sort of questions to be asking those downstream teams to be able to better understand their needs.
Got it. Okay. Teresa, you want to follow on with that?
Yeah, I agree with everything Joshua was saying, of course. My experience with the analytics and even more the data science boot camps was the same. Like, I spent a lot of my time doing what could be considered data engineering for my projects, particularly on the more complex projects. I remember even in my analytics capstone, I didn't realize it at the time, but I spent 90% of the time that I had available doing data engineering work, because I was getting complex, messy data from an API, and that was a lot of work. It didn't leave enough time to do the analytics part, which I was really looking forward to.
Mary and I were just talking about that a little bit this morning. Mary said, "Oh yeah, your capstone," which I'd forgotten about, right? But it's like, oh yeah, that's right. So yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No worries. But yeah, like that capstone, it was really, really challenging. And it's probably set me up for the path that I'm on now. And that continued in data science. I think the data engineering is a little bit more of an explicit inclusion in the data science program because you are working with more complex data, you're answering more complex questions. So feature engineering, transforming the
Right.
data, working with very large data sets like what Joshua was talking about with the hop teaming project, where you can't physically fit all of that data into memory on your local machine. So how do you work with it? Well, you have to
Right.
engineer that data so that it's consumable. And that's really led into a lot of what I do because like I have one of the reports that I maintain is the base data. One of the base data sets is, I don't know, somewhere around 50 or 60 billion rows. I might be low on that. It's a lot. It's very, very large.
That's a lot.
I'm going to say, like, you can't put that into Power BI before it's transformed. You will be waiting another year for that to load. It's never going to happen. And so the data engineering mindset where you're getting that data into the smallest form possible, doing the transformations ahead of time, it's really important to be able to do the analytics part of my job or to serve that data for somebody else to do analytics on. But to Joshua's point, understanding what the end product is, knowing the questions to ask, particularly if you're working with non-data stakeholders. So in my job, I work a lot with financial stakeholders. So the FinOps team, the finance team, they're one of my primary consumers. Well, they don't speak data in the same way that I speak data.
Right.
So I have to be able to meet them where they are. And with my data analytics and data science education, I'm able to take what they say, translate it into what needs to happen with the data, and then work back to the data engineering in order to support that. So I don't know that I could have been a good data engineer without knowing analytics and data science.
Okay.
Teresa's answer inspired a couple more thoughts for me on this. And just to address two of the, so one of them is that analytics also plays into engineering when you get into monitoring. There's a good amount of analytics and even data science if you really want to get into anomaly detection and stuff like that. And I know Teresa has really been a kind of a pioneer for that on her team and trying to push for some of that anomaly detection for security reasons and otherwise. And so there are aspects of where even data engineering can start to require that analytics or that data science work very specifically. And that has been extraordinarily valuable to be able to see. And then the other side of this is kind of what the distinction is. John, you were getting at what is the work? Is there a distinction between the kind of work? And there is. I of course, maybe the more annoying way to say it is one of it, like the analytics and the data science are maybe more numbery, but even that's a little bit misguided. I think there's a question that NSS asks a lot of people when they're helping them diagnose, for instance, whether they want to go into data, whether they want to go into data or software engineering, which is, do you like building systems or do you like to answer questions? And I might be slightly mischaracterizing that, but that's roughly how I remember it.
No, I think that's pretty close. Yeah.
And I think that's fair. And especially in analytics, I think that probing into specific questions and maybe unearthing new questions and being able to probe into those, and that also endless process of clarifying what specific words mean is big in analytics. It's also going to be very big in data science. And data engineering, I think of as a discipline of systems building. And so really it's the data side of that. Do you want to build a system? And I do think that does end up sort of cropping up. And that's where I at least see the distinction, while there still being occasions to be doing analytics work through monitoring or otherwise. But yeah, systems building versus necessarily specific problems, all within the data domain.
Got it. Oh, that's great. Yeah, really interesting. Okay, cool. I'm curious, and I mean, if we want to come back to this, I'm great. But I thought of a question for you, Joshua, a couple minutes ago. A lot of our discussion has been in the context of healthcare because both of you have spent a good chunk of time in the healthcare world. But Joshua, you said you're now supporting FinTech, so you're in the financial world. So, I think just listening sort of superficially, data engineering sounds very horizontal. The So I'm curious, as you've now shifted into a focus on working with different kinds of data in a different industry, how much of what we're talking about with data engineering is really is there a vertical focus? Because analytics and data science, answering questions tends to be very vertical, right? The questions I'm answering in healthcare, a lot of them, most of them are very different than I would answer maybe in manufacturing or finance or whatever. So I'm curious about data engineering. Is what are you seeing so far, Joshua, on that?
Yeah, this is a funny. I think you really put your finger on it. You see this a lot in Teresa's context, where you as a data engineer or data architect, somebody who's helping build out that system, become reliant upon the analysts and the data scientists for understanding what the data is. And so there's definitely a help me help you kind of relationship that develops.
Yeah, right.
Where you're sort of going to them to ask them about something that they just are familiar with at this point, but at some point they had to tease out about what all these words mean, what do these metrics mean, whether you're in health tech or fintech or any other domain. So there is a degree which the skill set is almost industry agnostic. Everybody needs data engineers if they have data coming in, but you do have to at least access people who are very knowledgeable of the data to be able to work with it well. And so then you get into, for instance, data modeling is one of these spaces where you need to organize the information in a meaningful way, and that meaning has to be useful for the company, has to be meaningful to the company. And that is also going to look different depending on your use case. If you're trying to do high scale analytics or model training versus if you're trying to serve an application. So you have multiple variables at play there, but you are dependent usually on the people who are working with that data answer particular questions to be able to understand your work, in my experience. You do have to acquire industry knowledge, but a lot of times you're still interacting with people who are even closer to that data than you are.
Okay. Cool. Thanks. Good stuff. All right. I'm going to shift gears to something slightly more self-referential for NSS. We're in the process of launching a data engineering bootcamp. In fact, the first cohort of data engineering bootcamp is about half through. This is a program that we launched under the ProTech umbrella, which, ProTech's a program that we have that was at least partially funded by a grant from the state of Tennessee Department of Economic and Community Development, just to get the plug in for the state, which allows us to give this for free to graduates of NSS, either software development boot camps or data boot camps, to help them acquire additional skills that might help them be more competitive in what's been a slower job market the last couple of years while we're all waiting for that to turn around. So, so we've launched this. I think we probably had conversations maybe with both of you about the curriculum, maybe a little bit. But I mean, but based on your experience, what advice would you give to somebody who's considering a data engineering boot camp, maybe versus analytics, data science, or maybe software development, right? Although neither of you are grads of software development, but you've worked with lots of folks who are primarily software development focused. So curious your thoughts about maybe picking data engineering versus picking one of the other pathways. So I'll just throw it out.
I think Joshua's point earlier about systems thinking versus problem solving is perhaps a good distinguisher for data engineers as well as software engineers. So a couple of years ago, we hired somebody on our team who had come out of the software engineering program or the web development. And she very specifically wanted to be a data engineer. I met her at a meetup. She said she wanted to be a data engineer. I was like, great, we have an opening on our team. We'll be doing some sort of data engineering. Who knows? And so we hired her. And she was a much more systems thinker than I was. She didn't want to do front end at all. Like she was very much about that back end system, making it efficient, making that work and did really well with that. So yeah, I think somebody who's trying to decide between data engineering and data analytics or data science, like you still have to be interested in data. Like a software engineer who's not interested in data probably isn't a good fit. You
Well,
still need to
software
care about
engineer,
the data itself.
yeah,
Sorry, go
software
ahead.
engineer who's not interested in data isn't really interested in software either. So
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think you still have to have like that very strong interest, and maybe it's a spectrum too. Like nobody is all one or all the other. And so maybe the ideal data engineer somebody who's like a little bit more on that systems thinking side, but still has characteristics of the problem solving and analytics side. And it might just be because of kind of the way that I've developed in my career. Like I can't separate the problem solving from the systems thinking. And that might also be because I didn't set up my own data platform. I have a wonderful engineer who did that for me. But, like it's because if you're creating that data set to, that's destined for data analytics or ML or data science in any way, you're solving a problem. And so it's not just a pure system that will just work with some sort of
right.
input. You still have a direction and a goal.
Yeah, I don't think I can improve on that answer very much. I will add one other component that, John, you can smack me down on this because my software engineering has been sort of acquired out of interest and out of refining my data engineering abilities. But one thing that stands out to me about data engineering, at least so far in my career, is how organizationally tied it is. And so when I say that, specifically both at ACA, when I worked with this FinTech company at Azure AI, you're interacting with kind of some sort of an end-to-end. There are sub-teams at HCA that have their own data engineers that have maybe a smaller scope of end-to-end than maybe at the enterprise level. But what you are doing is thinking about what is the organizational structure to some degree and making sense of your data in light of that, and also in light of how the data is going to be used, in light of where the value is going to be coming from, and then trying to sort of design your systems to optimize on almost like organizational identity. And so maybe one thing that I hadn't expected as much coming into the industry is how much data engineers operate within the space of helping the organization self-define from a technical standpoint. And I'm guessing that software engineers would see themselves as doing that as well at the product level. That, of course, they're building the product, they're defining the product, they're having to declare
Right.
the requirements there. But when I think of, for instance, like an enterprise, I think of there being maybe many software products and those software engineers' scope being focused on those products. But I think of data engineers almost always thinking about what the organization's identity is from a technical standpoint. And so one thing I would tell people to be ready for is, especially if you're going to excel within this career, to be ready to help your organization define itself in a lot of ways. You're going to be thinking about, what do you want your work to look like? What do you want other people's work to look like? What are the organizational boundaries? Who's going to, questions of ownership are all extremely important. And it turns out data exposes all of that. It's the data really starts to look like the blood of an organization. That characterizes how it develops.
Yeah. There's no effective way to do the data modeling to set up your data architecture independent of what's this organization about? What do we do? Right.
Yeah.
What are we trying to achieve? And I think that's all. I mean, that's also true of the software application layer. Right. So if you're talking about software engineers who are applications builders,
Yes,
that's going to be true of your applications as well. When you get deeper level in software engineering and you're building middleware or things like that, then you're away from, although it's in the context of the product, you're still thinking about the product, right? But a lot of times that's much more horizontal, right? I mean, if you're a developer at GitHub, you're into software configuration management and all that stuff, which can be used in lots of different vertical industries. I don't suspect there's any way. I can't think of a way you do data engineering that was as that independent of organizational context.
Yeah.
So, all right, good stuff, guys. So I think we've really talked on the kinds of mindsets that maybe people would have to help them thrive in the data engineering role versus an analyst or data scientist, maybe software engineering a little bit as well. So what else haven't we talked about? Well, I know one thing that curious about your guys' perspective in, based on how you've described where you're situated at HCA, Teresa. I don't know how much exposure you've gotten to this quite yet, but this does seem to be a career area that's really on the rise, right? There just seems to be, all the data we've looked at suggests there's some real push behind data engineering. And from, at least reading, studying, talking to people, it does seem like all of this, well, and actually you alluded to this a little bit indirectly, Joshua, you're interested in machine learning. So, this explosion in, at least interest in, if not implementation of, not just machine learning, but all the generative AI stuff, or AI as a generic thing. My perception is that you cannot do generative AI without having your data act really together. Now, that's just perception I have as kind of an old school data guy. But so curious about your thoughts about the whole, generative AI, or maybe AI more broadly, machine learning, which helps us feed the LLMs and everything, right? So curious about, your thoughts about that, but that as a driver, maybe that as something that may really be an accelerant or a sustainer on data engineering oriented careers as a longer term career opportunity for people. Curious about your guys' thoughts on that, because again, you're in this up to your elbows, so kind of curious your guys' perspectives.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. From what I've seen, quality data is the only way to get quality output from Gen AI or machine learning or any kind of model. And that's definitely been a big focus at HCA. Joshua, you're probably seeing some of that, even it's been a little while since you were there, but it was already starting. There's a big focus on developing AI products or smarter products, machine learning, to support, the caregivers at HCA or provide better outcomes for the patients. That's a particularly healthcare context, but it's a big concern there. And there's a lot of focus on the quality of the data in order to provide those quality outcomes. Because when you're talking about somebody's health, giving the doctor the right information to provide that diagnosis, you can't mess up. Like, you can't have, it's like, oops, we'll get it right next time, maybe. No, there's no second chance. It has to be right the first time. And so there's been a lot of work and a lot of discussion amongst the broader community that I've gotten to listen in on and observe, that how do you make sure that the data is correct, especially when it's unstructured data?
Right.
How do you stop the models from hallucinating? What kind of constraints are appropriate to stop that hallucination while still allowing it to function and have enough freedom to provide good information? And it's a hard balance to do.
Oh, yeah.
And like, HCA has already had a lot of success in using models that are for optimizing scheduling and optimizing the handoff between shifts, that kind of information. But it's because of the focus on quality data. In my context, because I don't work with clinical data, I work with all operational data, financial data. For us, the quality of the metadata is crucial. And we're going through a large remediation effort right now to clean up that metadata, because as much as people think about HCA as being healthcare, it's just as much, IT and operational support, because healthcare is so dependent on technology now. Our EHRs are all on the cloud. Everything is cloud dependent, or if it's not in cloud, it's still on a computer. And so being able to have that quality metadata means that when something goes wrong or is about to go wrong, you know what's going to be affected by that, what's downstream. If you don't have the relationships right, if you don't have things labeled correctly, you're shooting in the dark. And we're so complex now that we can't do that. Not just HCA, but I think life in general. So that's where we are with AI, and also using it internally to be able to accelerate development. If you don't have quality data to put into that, you can't accelerate development. And so all the information that's in people's head, all that institutional knowledge that's never been written down, all of the documentation that just kind of lives somewhere that nobody can access, those are all problems to effectively help the software developers develop faster and more effectively, or to be able to troubleshoot what they're doing. So yeah, I absolutely agree. Quality data is foundational.
Yeah, Teresa highlighted a lot of the kind of real points of interest here. This is a topic on which I could rant. I'm sure we all could in various ways. There's lots of rantability involved in generative AI, and
rantability. Okay, I'm using that one.
It's a rant-rife industry. I think to highlight a couple things, it certainly generative AI has foregrounded the power of data. And I think data has had sort of rolling moments in society where we've been like, oh, wow, first of all, I didn't know we were collecting all this information. And then, oh, I didn't know we could use all this information in these various ways. And if anything, it's at least put in the public consciousness again that like data is extraordinarily important, and we can be using it in all sorts of scary ways, but also impressive or useful ways. And I think that in one case, what that means is other kind of forms of data engineering have become more prominent. So feature engineering is still data engineering. It's just a little bit downstream from what we typically call data engineering, because they're directly serving an ML model or an ML team or something along those lines. But it's still essentially a data engineer who has to answer a lot of the same questions, go through some of the same kind of systems building and problem solving. And same thing goes with analytics engineers. But I think maybe a couple things jumped to mind that Teresa, I think, really rose that were crucial. I think what Gen AI has really prompted is the need for organizational knowledge in being able to apply these things, and maybe even the distinction between knowledge and data. And that there is a huge amount of sort of, we talk a lot about context engineering now, right? Rather than prompt engineering, and that context engineering is largely metadata, and that there's the context of what our data means, how we want to use it is metadata. And there's a renewed push in things like knowledge graphs that kind of had a moment maybe 10, 15 years ago, and are returning as a way of constellating our institutional knowledge and providing that to these models in an automated way so that they can help answer institutional questions. And that's very interesting. I think that's a really cool horizon that is maybe not even directly a data engineering thing, but that kind of people can start to gravitate toward or move toward if they want to grow in that way, because there's going to be an increasing desire for that. I think especially at the large enterprise level, where it's so hard to have institutional knowledge, and the same questions get asked a million times over, and it feels like they should have their own Stack Overflow. And so my hesitation with all of that is, I also, just to seize one moment to actually rant, which is that I do think that models have been sold very well, that the large language models have been sold very well. And I think they've been sold beyond the abilities of the transformer architecture. And so I think there's incredible power, clearly. But I think we confuse usefulness with intelligence at this point. And even the marketing is pretty bad, I think, as far as I have an email on hand where they led with a Gen AI product, and they said, more doing, less thinking. And it just made me wonder, like, why any of us even got into this industry if that's really supposed to be the appeal. But I do think it's supposed to be an appeal to a lot of executives who see an opportunity to reduce the costs of their institutions by automating away knowledge work. But that's the downside of the horizon. If the data engineering opportunities being, can you automate away your job? But I do think that these particular models are oversold and actually can't do like innovative thought in the same way. They can't regurgitate. And so that's my hesitation with a lot of this is I think in a lot of wrong ways, institutions are expecting that they'll be able to replace human thought that I don't think they actually can.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you're not going to get an argument from me on that one, Joshua, because I think they have been tremendously oversold. But I think the technology, even as it exists today, has valuable applications.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you just have to be, you got to be so thoughtful about it. And even those applications are totally dependent on good data. And not just the data, but an understanding. Your point, Teresa, about the sort of the metadata, right? Which has been, again, my perspective on this goes back a day or two before your guys. I mean, I got into database technology. I mean, that was my root technology in tech. So I go back to database management systems about 1973, way before relational database could be really run successfully. I mean, this is like 3 years or 4 years after Ted Codd wrote his original relational database papers, which were magnificent. But anyways, but the metadata problem, right, is we started with pre-relational databases, which I had a bunch of experience with, and then relational databases. How do we capture the metadata, right? How do we organize the metadata? So we used to try to, data dictionaries or data directories, and a lot of people have spent a lot of time tilting at those windmills over the years. And I don't think we've ever come up with a decent solution to that. I mean, for all the success we've had with relational databases and all the types of data management tools we have, the metadata problem is still a problem, right? And maybe some better tooling around knowledge graphs now, but I mean, we tried, to get the metadata under control, and then, there was a whole wave of interest in knowledge management systems to help with this stuff. And a lot of people blunted their spears on that one over the years. And then, so yeah, I think there's a long way to go with this stuff, to say nothing of the fact that generative AI at today's state of the art is not going to solve, I don't think it's going to solve the problems some people claim it's going to solve. It's the foundation, your point about the foundation models, they're probability machines at the end of the day, so that you can't predictably, successfully, repeatedly solve problems we've never had to solve before with something that's predicting based on the past.
Yeah.
I don't think. So, but what do I know? Yeah, what the heck? But it's cool technology, so we're all going to get to spend a lot of time and money on it in the next few years. So anyways, well, again, thank you guys for that. I've really enjoyed the conversation we've had here about data engineering. This has been great. So, and I thank you for that. And if you think there's anything we've missed on that, I'd love for you to jump in. But we have a couple of questions on the way out, at least one that we always ask everybody. So I'm going to throw that one on the table. And that's about technology guilty pleasures. And we've had a breadth of pretty interesting answers to that question. So including figuring out what some people think the boundary of technology is when they talk about guilty pleasures. So what's your technology guilty pleasure, Joshua?
Two of them come to mind. And one of them is just, I tend to say that the worst part of our industry is that we have to look at screens all the time. And it's just like there's always flashing. And everybody on this call is wearing glasses, and there's a reason for that. And so I'm really interested in e-ink technology, kind of ways of kind of representing little things that don't blast your eyes. And also don't like necessarily destroy your focus or your attention, because over time that's become a commodity, right? Your attention that everything is vying for, and that you yourself have to sort of make discipline out of having and maintaining and using and directing. And the other one would be sort of related to our rant conversation, but like small language model development, on-device language development.
Yeah.
So very much into the cloud, and that's been very fun and interesting. But then as all of this industry develops, the idea of like more targeted small language models that could be able to accomplish things, and that you could self-host or host for much cheaper than outsourcing to an API for a supermassive company that's trying to influence the world politically or something, makes me feel good. And so the guilty part of that is just like when I'm very satisfied to watch something like watch a large language model fail or do worse, and just like wonder whether that's good in me to be like, look at that. Sucker. Like there's just sort of like something a little bit spiteful in me when I see large language models be too expensive or go awry. And but the positive side of that is small language model cottage industry. That's
Yeah. So the intelligence at the edge instead of it in the center. Yes. Yeah. As opposed to Chat GPT gone wild or whatever. So,
all right.
Okay. Cool. Teresa, what about you? What's your technology guilty pleasure?
So I think my technology guilty pleasure is that at the end of the day, I don't use it. Like when I get done with work, I close the computer and I try to not think about technology.
Oh, you're going to stay sane a lot longer than the rest of us then.
I'm trying very, very hard. So yeah, so I close it. If you want, I don't feel guilty about it either. Like I just,
cool.
It's necessary for my sanity. Sometimes I feel a little bit bad because people I work with, they're doing like all these cool side projects outside of work. It's like, that seems really interesting. But for me, just to maintain sanity and be able to wake up and still be excited about my job tomorrow,
right?
I need to step away and do something different.
Sure.
So that's
well, then
what I
let
do.
me ask you a different question. And I heard this I was doing a podcast on WPLN, and I think the host or one of the other guests asked the question this way. So what are you a geek about? Because we're all geeks about something. It doesn't have to be technology, right? So when you shut that computer and you're done working for the day, what do you geek out on?
That's a great question. I love that. So I geek out about several things. Very, very high on the list is Jane Austen. So this is the 250th anniversary of Jane Austen's birth. So there's a lot of things going on. And I have just dedicated all my free time this year to Jane Austen. So I cross-stitch Jane Austen inspired patterns. I read all of her books. I read books about Jane Austen. I went to a Jane Austen festival a few weeks ago.
Holy cow.
Yeah. So that's something that really gets me excited. In fact, last year I did my data science capstone on Jane Austen. So I started early. Yeah. Other than that, I like to do crafts. So I do a lot of cross stitch. I knit a lot. I read a lot. And those are the things I geek out about outside of data.
Good. That's all good, healthy stuff. Yeah.
That is.
All right. That's cool. Thank you. Thanks to both of you. I mean, I really appreciate the two of you carving some time out to be able to talk with us about this. I think this whole data engineering area is really going to be really kind of critically important if we're going to do anything serious with, whether it's foundation models or whatever it is, wherever this is going, agentic applications or, whatever. So I think Joshua, you said it, that sort of this renewed interest again and this time we mean it. We're going to get our act together on data. So thanks to both of you. I really appreciate it. And so I think that's probably it. So thanks for listening. You can find links to anything that we talked about in today's podcast in the show notes down below, as they say in the podcast game. Hear more insights like these when you visit NashvilleSoftwareSchool.com, whether that's through our podcast, through our blog, or just check out the website and see what we're up to. So hopefully we'll see you back here sometime soon for another episode of Stories from the Hackery.